What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 92, and I am the host, Kyle Lanslone. Solo show today. Interviews lined up for all next week, so be sure to subscribe to the show somewhere so you don't miss any of those great interviews. YouTube and Odyssey for the video version of the show. Although, with the increasing censorship on YouTube, I really suggest Odyssey. I don't think it'll be long before we're unable to listen to our favorite podcasters at YouTube. And Odyssey, I think, is the best alternative because it's crypto based and it makes it so easy for listeners to donate to the show. And not only do your donations help the show financially, it also helps through the site to promote the show. The more donations you have, the higher it ranks the show. So, because of a few generous donations, this show already has 4 stars, which is helping it to get out there to new listeners. So that's Odyssey. Definitely check that out. You could listen to the audio version of the show anywhere you could listen to podcasts. Give it a rating and review. Then the show is hosted at the Libertarian Institute. I'm the news editor. I write the daily news roundup there. And when you go to the Libertarian Institute, you could find all of the great podcasts, The Scott Horton Show, Free Man Beyond the Wall, hosted by Pete Quinones, Don't Tread on Anyone, Keith Knight, and a few others. So libertarianinstitute.org for all those great shows. And then check out the sponsor of the show, Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeStore.com sells great CBD products. They're lab tested, so they work the same every time. I really like the topicals. The co-host, Will Porter, he's really into the products that have combinations with melatonin. It helps him with some insomnia. So PalomaVerdeStore.com. Use the promo code PEACE, PEACE, and that'll give you 25% off on checkout, and it'll also help out the show. So again, PalomaVerdeStore.com, promo code PEACE. Now let's get into some of the news. So one of the things I want to talk about first on today's show is we're well over a year into this whole COVID thing now. People locked down, people out of jobs, major hits the U.S. economy, and major suffering for a lot of people in the United States because of it. Businesses are closing, they can't stay open. Every businesses that close lays off a few more people. It's a horrible situation. And yet the U.S. government really hasn't repurposed assets to fight the COVID cause. Now, they've shut things down, they limited the rights and the freedoms of other people, but by and large, they haven't cut the military budget. They haven't looked to, reform or, even made some like maybe temporary means testing with Social Security, something along those lines. If you're going to like close a whole bunch of national parks for an entire year, how about taking some of that money and then trying to roll that into the COVID spending? There's a lot of things that don't seem to have happened on a large scale, particularly with the military budget, but just generally other places in the way the government spending has worked, where it seems like there's a lot of maybe discretionary projects that could wait a few years, could be put off. If you have a real crisis, a once in a century or once in a millennia virus that you have to do everything to stop right away, then then show that by maybe, do you need to constantly sail ships around China's coast and through the Taiwan Strait? Are those necessary military operations now? Do you need to fly B-52s to the Middle East and back as a show of force to Iran? Do we even need to look at maybe at a wider scope of closing some of our military bases and saying like, hey, like right now we can't afford this kind of stuff, and so we have to look to do different things, at least scaling down the aggressive operations, especially against Iran and China, that we're carrying out. Seems to be things ending the war in Afghanistan. It'll save us money. We can't afford it anymore. It's a shame we can't build a nation in that country. But at this point with COVID, we just have to give up on certain projects. It's not happening at all. And so it does make you wonder how serious the government actually is about fighting COVID. How much of this is just all about taking away our rights versus how much of this is actually about trying to eliminate the virus and stomp it out or whatever, flatten the curve, whatever the hell they say they're trying to do. More evidence of this is after a $2 trillion COVID relief bill, and they're saying, hey, we may need another COVID relief bill coming up. Biden is now unveiling a $2 trillion infrastructure plan. And there's so much in the plan that really doesn't have to do with infrastructure. So some of the details that I pulled from the plan, and we'll get into a little bit more nuance on it all later. But about $250 billion, 261 billion on repairing 220,000 miles of highway, 10,000 bridges, major airport upgrades, and new electronic charging stations. 200 billion on what they're going to call affordable housing units. 111 billion on clean water in schools, 80 billion on rail, 18 billion on upgrading VA hospitals. And those are kind of the public numbers that I'm seeing put out, and I'm not finding, or I haven't been able to like dig through the plan yet to like see what's what the little like $1 million is going here, $10 million is going here. We're still looking at pretty big chunks of money, so it's hard to tell when they say $111 billion for clean water in schools. What does that mean? Can you not like just bring like little water containers into schools for less than $100 billion? Or what kind of infrastructure projects are you talking about? And so Brad Palumbo gets into a little bit in this article at Fee and starts to break it down a little bit more. And this article is about 9 crazy examples of unrelated waste and partisan spending in the $2 trillion infrastructure proposal. And he's saying that, look, some of the stuff in here, maybe repairing roads is traditional infrastructure, but a lot of the things in here really, and so I'm guessing they're parts of these very large lump sum numbers. So number one, $10 billion to create a civilian climate corp. Number two, $20 billion to advance racial equality and environmental justice. Number three, $175 billion in subsidies for electric vehicles. I'm guessing that's part of the charging stations, but what else is going into that? $213 billion to build retrofit 2 million houses and buildings. This is a part of the 2 million sustainable affordable housing units they're hoping to build. A lot of times these public building projects don't tend to have long-term success. I don't know what the actual plans here are. Here we have 100 billion for new public schools and making school lunches greener. Number 6, 12 billion for community colleges. Number 7, billions to eliminate racial and gender inequalities in STEM. Number 8, 100 billion in broadband internet, and 25 billion, this is number 9, billion for government childcare programs. And I mean, some of these things that you may look at this whole list and say, I want all those things passed. Most of them aren't infrastructure, though, and that's a big problem in Washington, is that so often they have these massive bills that end up being, billions, hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars, rather than passing bills that are, billions of dollars of spending at a time. If you want a civilian climate corp, that should be a separate bill. That can't be a part of an infrastructure bill. They're two separate things. And one of the things this really does is I think it turns a lot of Americans against each other, because somebody looks at this bill and they say, well, there's these 10 things I don't like in it. It totals about $1 trillion in spending, so I'm against it. And somebody else says there's these 10 things I like, and it totals $1 trillion in spending, and so I'm for it. And the person who's against it, who says anybody who's for it is a complete idiot. Anybody who's for it says anybody who is against it is a terrible person and wants the world to die. And so people hate each other, even though the bills are just too big and they're not debating small enough issues on a lot of these things. But again, I think it does really go to show, if you're concerned about fighting COVID, if that's the fight that you had to fight, that you can't go hug your grandma, it's so extreme that you have to wear masks everywhere, that so many people have been out of work for an entire year, then maybe you need to like put off some of these things. And here's another great example of it. Microsoft lands $21 billion contract to arm U.S. soldiers with futuristic augmented reality headsets. For people who've been listening to either conflicts of interest or going way back to foreign policy focus, might remember I actually talked about this when the U.S. Army gave Microsoft $480 million, so nearly $500 million, to develop a prototype headset built around the company's HoloLens technology. Based on its performance, Microsoft will now provide up to 120,000 of the headsets, and that's at the cost of $21.88 billion. It's not exactly clear like how much this is going to help the U.S. Army, or if these things are actually going to work appropriately. In 2019, when CNBC tested it, it said that it was a bit buggy and that it needed to be restarted during the demonstration session. And several months later, the military is still reporting glitches with the devices, including GPS and imaging errors, and poor low light and thermal sensor performance. And so there's quite a bit of improvement still to go with these HoloLens devices. Another thing to point out is that this seems like it's going to be a Wi-Fi cloud-based system here, and Microsoft has had some hacking problems, and so one wonders if they took that into consideration at the Pentagon when they gave Microsoft this massive project. Again, going back to the COVID thing though, that I think is so important, is this is a place where the Army could say like, hey, look, we see there's bigger problems at home, and so rather than taking this $20 billion and spending it on this HoloLens system, we're going to repurpose this money and use it for whatever COVID relief related, or even just saving the money, putting it towards the previous COVID relief bills or something like that. But even throughout this whole thing, the Army and military has all been asking for more money, and Congress keeps giving it to them. The U.S. Army is seeking longer range missiles. I'm sure they're going to get it. This is from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. He writes, as part of its modernization efforts, the U.S. Army is developing long and medium range missiles, which the service sees as a vital weapon in a potential conflict with China in the Pacific. While the Army is traditionally a land-based service, it is developing fast-moving land-hopping forces that can sink ships in the Western Pacific, similar to what the Marine Corps has typically done. So, as China has been invented as this bigger and bigger threat that we have to combat, even though we sail our warships and fly our warplanes right off their coast, we have to, have this more aggressive and offensive against them. And it's just more and more money for the military branches and the weapons makers. The whole military industrial complex is raking in huge on China. And so the Army, which has, as they say, traditionally been a land-based fighting, is now looking more at, being able to do this island hopping stuff, not to be left out of the whole, money scheme here. And I'm sure it's going to end up being, multi-$100 billion sale to develop these new long-range missiles. One of the other things it's going to do is that they're going to say we're developing these missiles to combat China, but they're going to be long-range missiles in the Western Pacific, and so any country in the Western Pacific who's not under the U.S. security umbrella is going to feel uncomfortable about them, and this is going to include North Korea and Russia. And so when North Korea and Russia then do something that's perceived as hostile, a show of force type move, maybe deploying more military assets to the region for North Korea, maybe a new weapons test or something like that, right? It's the U.S. is going to be like, oh, why would they be doing this unless they're trying to ramp up aggression and they're just being aggressive, when it's going to be a counter to a different U.S. policy. All right, moving on. There's this really crazy thing that happened. Facebook bans Voice of Trump from the platform. And I really hope we get some more clarification on what this actually means. Like if I share a meme of Donald Trump, like not a meme, but a picture, a screenshot of one Donald Trump's tweet, is that the Voice of Trump? And then also, I mean, he was the president, so what's happening now, the context of what happened in the past 4 years is very important. We've talked in the past on the show how myself, Will Porter, Connor Freeman have expressed some difficulty, finding some things that Trump tweeted about that weren't news stories related to foreign policy, because all of his stuff is banned from Twitter, and it's hard to go by just a screenshot level because there's so much fake stuff out there or slightly altered content that you can't just assume that stuff's real. And how do you match it up and figure out exactly what he did and didn't tweet, because he tweeted so much while he was president of the United States, and everything that he tweeted during, especially his, even prior to being in the U.S., the president, because he becomes president, but particularly why he's campaigning while he's president, it really they need to find some way to restore that in a way that we could all look at it, see it, reference it. But who knows to what extent it's banned. And then it kind of seems like the only way that Trump is actually banned from Facebook, and when they say bans his voice, is in the sense of, if you're saying something positive about Trump or using Trump's voice to say something positive about him, I guess. So, unless he gives a speech and he's like, Joe Biden's an idiot for not following through with the Afghan deal, and oh boy, I set it up perfect for him to get out, and he's botching the whole thing, he would be right about that. Now, not that I think Trump really maybe would have even followed through if he were president, but just, him saying that is probably right about that. Will that get taken down versus if Trump says Biden is being soft on China and I attack Trump for that, right? Would that be left up even if I played both clips? My guess is that I would probably get away with the one bashing Trump and not the one just praising him, or even an informational one. I think if he just gave an interview and I posted the interview, that would be taken down. So it's a little bit disturbing they're trying to memory hold Trump so much. Article from antiwar.com by Matt Agarist. Police mistakenly raid the home of a great-grandfather, permanently injure him. So Willard King was at his home with his granddaughter and great-granddaughter. I guess his granddaughter was the mother, and the great-granddaughter is a 4-month-old baby. Police fire tear gas and stuff into the home. It's a legit raid. They come in, they pin this elderly man to the ground with their riot shield and beat him. The granddaughter and the baby have to flee the home because of the tear gas. Very dangerous stuff, exposing that to a baby. And after they beat him, they dragged him by his feet outside of the residence, and he said, that's where I laid there, bled until they handcuffed me and then drugged me out here on the porch, and you can still see the blood here that ain't got cleaned up yet. So again, his blood is still sitting there outside of his home, at least at the time that he gave that interview. So this is just a horrible case of police abuse. He's looking and suing for $3 million. The only thing I could recommend is that you fire all the police officers involved in this raid and give their pension to Mr. Willard King here, because I don't really think that taxpayers should all have to pay for the abuse of police officers. Here we go with one from Shadowproof by Kevin Gostola. And this guy, Kevin Gostola, does such a great job of carrying and covering all the whistleblower stuff. And, there's the higher profile cases, Chelsea Manning, John Kiriakou, and then, publishers who are being persecuted like Julian Assange. But Daniel Hale, who is prominent, but Kevin covers everyone. So check out his YouTube channel or his site, Shadowproof, for all of his coverage on whistleblowers. This particular one, drone whistleblower charged with violating Espionage Act, pleads guilty. This is Daniel Hale, who blew the whistle on the United States government targeted assassination program that includes drones. and he pled guilty to transmitting and retaining national defense information in violation of the Espionage Act. And then he, of course, is the first whistleblower that Joe Biden gets to credit himself with a guilty conviction and putting him in jail. Hale gave documents to Jeremy Scahill for the Dirty Wars project back in 2014. Eventually, he gets arrested and charged with this. He also appeared in the great documentary National Bird. If anybody hasn't seen it, it's, I would say, that the best documentary on the U.S. drone program that I've seen. It's very good. And so, what was going on in Hale's case is there were 5 charges against him, but the main charge was this Espionage Act charge. And so he pled guilty to that. And I guess typically what would happen here is he would plead guilty to that, and then would be sentenced, and that would be the end of that. But in this case, the prosecution asked the judge to allow them to still bring forward the charges at a potential trial for the other 4 counts if they're not happy with how the sentencing goes. And the judge is going to allow this, which is apparently very unusual. And so it sounds like, just another case of where you have a whistleblower and, they say, oh, go through proper channels and all that. But it's set up to make sure that people don't bring information to the public that exposes government crimes. And if they do, they get punished. Hale can't even say, like, look, I did this because drone strikes were killing little kids and it was making me sick to my stomach. I mean, this is an illegal program where the president, at the time Obama, was just ordering people dead, and it didn't matter who actually got killed. There were no consequences for anybody, and he blew the whistle on that, and yet, he's the one that ends up going to jail for it. And at his trial, because it's an Espionage Act trial, he can't even defend himself and say, I did it for these moral reasons or because I thought it was unconstitutional. All right. A couple of stories on North Korea here that don't signal, I guess, good news. Biden does not intend to meet with North Korea's Kim. This is somebody just asked him, and he say he doesn't plan to. In one sense, I don't think that Biden should just go meet with Kim because Donald Trump did it. He needs to reshape, what the U.S. North Korea policy is, what we're looking to accomplish, and then go meet with Kim Jong-un and work out a deal that could actually be done. But it doesn't look like that's going to happen. While the U.S. North Korea policy is apparently still under review, Biden administration deciding what they want to do with that, the U.S. Spokesperson for the State Department, Ned Price, said the U.S. approach to North Korea will be in lockstep with allies, and denuclearization will remain at the center of the policy. So, I mean, to me, that pretty much ensures that nothing is going to be done here. And this is an article from Daniel Larison this week at antiwar.com titled Denuclearization is a Dead End. It's his opinion column for us. It comes out every Wednesday now. And what Larison does is he goes through and just says that, look, the whole idea that we're going to get North Korea to give up their nuclear weapons, while we still remain a hostile policy towards them, a maximum pressure campaign, isn't going to happen. It needs, to be a step-by-step approach. And, maybe one day North Korea will give up their nuclear weapons, but the real goal needs to be ending the hostile policy and the war on the Korean Peninsula. And it's not going to happen with this approach that Biden seems committed to. Found an interesting story here. The U.S. grants a 120-day waiver for Iraq to pay for electricity from Iran after Trump withdrew from the nuclear deal with Iran in 2018 and reimposed sanctions on Iran. The U.S. has continued to give these 3-month waivers or 4-month waivers to Iraq to buy Iranian energy, even though they're supposed to be sanctioned. It's this crazy thing where, like, we're trying to seize ships and sanction Venezuela for taking in Iranian energy, and yet we're allowing a government that we have troops, a country that we have troops deployed to, that we have a lot of control over in Iraq, and we're letting them to continue to buy Iranian oil or in energy because of their dependence on it. Certainly, the Venezuelans need the energy and electricity too, but we can't let the Iraqi state fall apart. That's one of the few governments here in this whole cycle that we're trying to prop up. I think it goes to show how kind of futile the whole sanctions project was in Iran, if we're even granting waivers still 3 years later. And of course, rather than granting just this one waiver, what the Biden administration should really be doing is granting like a waiver for all the sanctions on Iran while we work out how Iran's going to get back within the JCPOA and return to the deal. Although that's not looking great. I just saw this headline from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Iran's president sees no serious efforts from Biden to revive the nuclear deal. I did read that Iran was meeting with the other parties of the JCPOA, so that would be Russia, China, Germany, France, and the UK, and that those talks maybe had ended with some positive steps. But so far, that it doesn't seem like there's any serious talks between the US and the Iranians. And I mean, at least no public overture or no public statement from the Biden administration to suggest that there's really any serious overture for them to the Iranians to try to return to the deal, which Trump broke. And I don't know, maybe it will get through the heads of the people in the Biden administration that the maximum pressure campaign, that the sanctions against Iran aren't working, and that we need to kind of reorient what we're doing and realize that we just need to return to the deal that Trump broke. And the Iranians said that they're going to follow suit and get back in it. If they don't, there's ways we could pressure them through the JCPOA with our allies, France, Germany, the UK, and then maybe impose international sanctions on Iran if that ends up being what's going on. But likely, if the U.S. returns to the deal, none of that will be necessary, and Iran will follow suit. All right, and so, all right, that's the last thing I want to mention before we wrap up here. The idea that they're demanding that everybody needs to be vaccinated, and if people aren't vaccinated, then we're going to have all these variant strains and transmission of the virus, and the fear they're creating around this. And yet they still haven't lifted sanctions on Iran and Venezuela, which they're struggling with major COVID outbreaks, and lifting sanctions, while I'm sure would provide other boosts to the Iranian economy, would certainly provide a major boost for the government's ability to combat the COVID virus. But just like under Trump, Biden continues all the sanctions and killing the Iranian economy and harming their ability to fight COVID. Same thing with Venezuela. I'm sure it's happening with other countries that the U.S. is sanctioning, like Syria, like the campaign that we're waging against Yemen. If it really was an all-out campaign against COVID, like they said, they would be concerned about fighting COVID everywhere, not just in the United States. And one of the easiest ways to really improve how the world is fighting COVID is to lift the unnecessary sanctions against Venezuela, Syria, Iran, and then particularly lift the blockade in Yemen. But none of that's happening. So makes it seem a little unserious. All right, that's where I'll wrap up. I know it's a little bit of a shorter show today, but it wasn't a ton of really interesting news to talk about. But I will have, again, interviews all next week. Will Porter, Patrick McFarlane, Connor Freeman. So be sure to subscribe to the show somewhere. It's all on the show notes page. Help the show out financially if you can. Donate Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash. Links to those cryptos are in the show notes page. If you want to donate other cryptos, you could do that. Just let me know which ones you want, and I'll send you the link to the wallet. Patreon, Subscribestar, ways you could donate to the show. You could, of course, donate through Odyssey. Any way you can help out the show, I really appreciate it. I'll be back with another show next week.